The meeting was already a half-hour behind schedule. A delay Nolan Granger was certain Barbara Whitmore engineered to soften up the supplicants. The Willow Creek Community Clubhouse, with its faint aroma of industrial carpet cleaner and stale coffee, served as her courtroom. Nolan sat in the third row of uncomfortable folding chairs, his back straight, his file folder resting squarely on his knees. He had prepared. He had read the Architectural Control Committee guidelines cover to cover. He was an architect. He respected structure, order, and well-defined rules. This, he had told his wife Tessa, should be a simple matter of clarification. "Next item on the agenda," Barbara announced, her voice a reedy instrument of practiced authority. She adjusted the microphone, producing a painful squeal that made half the room flinch. "Appeal. Lot 72. Granger Residence. Unauthorized landscape feature." Nolan stood and walked to the small lectern facing the board's long table. Barbara sat at its center, flanked by 3 other board members who seemed to have mastered the art of looking both bored and anxious simultaneously. One of them, a man named Carl Jenkins, refused to make eye contact, focusing instead on a doodle of a perfect cube on his legal pad. "Good evening, Barbara, members of the board," Nolan began, his voice calm and even. He opened his folder. "My name is Nolan Granger, 114 Ashton Court. I'm here to appeal the ACC's denial for a small bird bath we installed in our front garden bed." He placed a photograph on the lectern, a clear 8x10 shot of the offending object, a simple, tasteful concrete basin on a pedestal, nestled among a bed of hostas. As you can see, it's modest in scale, matches the stone accents on our home, and is positioned more than 15 feet from the property line, in accordance with the setback requirements outlined in the CC&Rs. Barbara peered down at the photo through her half-moon glasses, her lips a thin, unmoving line. "Mr. Granger, the issue was never the setback. The ACC's denial, which the board upholds, is based on CC&R Section 8.4.2. She did not need to look the rule up. She recited it from memory. A pastor quoting scripture. All landscape modifications must maintain the visual harmony of the community and shall not obstruct the scenic view corridors established by the declarant." Nolan had anticipated this. "I appreciate that, Barbara. However, the term visual harmony is not defined anywhere in the governing documents, making its application subjective. Furthermore, I've reviewed the community's original plat maps. There is no officially designated scenic view corridor on or adjacent to my property. The bird bath obstructs a view of my neighbor's air conditioning unit. If anything," he added with a hint of a smile, "it improves the visual harmony." A few stifled chuckles rippled through the audience of a dozen or so homeowners. Barbara's gaze swept over them, and the room fell silent. "Your interpretation of the documents is noted," she said, the slight pause doing the work of an insult. "However, the board has long-standing precedent in interpreting Section 8.4.2 to protect the open, uncluttered aesthetic that our residents value. That is what maintains our property values." "With respect," Nolan pressed, keeping his tone level, "precedent can't create a rule that doesn't exist. For a restriction to be enforceable, it needs to be clearly stated in the CC&Rs. Subjectivity is not a legal standard." Barbara folded her hands on the table, a gesture of finality. "The board's interpretation is the standard. Mr. Granger, we are volunteers, giving our time to protect the investment of every homeowner here." She looked to her left and right. The other board members offered weak, synchronized nods. Carl Jenkins's cube had gained a shadow. The motion to approve the Granger's landscape feature is tabled indefinitely, pending a full community visual impact study, which the board may or may not choose to commission in the next fiscal year. It was a perfect bureaucratic execution. She hadn't said no. She had condemned his request to a purgatory from which nothing ever returned. He was dismissed. So, to be clear, Nolan said, holding his ground, you are refusing to vote on the appeal. We are tabling the matter, Barbara corrected him, her voice dripping with false patience. As is our prerogative. Thank you for your time, Mr. Granger. Next item, discussion of the revised holiday decorations policy. Nolan stood at the lectern for a moment longer, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of eyes. He had presented a logical case based on the community's own rules. He had been polite, prepared, and reasonable, and in return, he had been publicly and condescendingly swatted away. He gathered his photo and his folder, gave a single, formal nod to the board, and walked back to his seat. The message was clear. The rules were whatever Barbara Whitmore said they were. The drive home was quiet. Nolan replayed the meeting in his head, the architect in him frustrated by the flagrant disregard for process, the homeowner in him feeling a slow, simmering anger when he pulled into the driveway of their two-story craftsman. The lights were on, casting a warm, welcoming glow. Through the picture window, he could see the source of the entire conflict. The birdbath stood in the soft light of the landscape uplighting, a silent, concrete rebel. He walked in to find Tessa at the dining room table, which was covered in a neat grid of documents. A thick, 3-ring binder lay open. It was the complete covenants, conditions, and restrictions for the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, Inc. A yellow highlighter was tucked behind her ear. So she asked, not looking up from a page dense with legalese. Tessa was a paralegal, and she treated contracts and bylaws with the focused respect a surgeon gives to an anatomy textbook. She navigated their dense clauses with an ease Nayland envied. Tabled indefinitely, he said, loosening his tie. She cited 8.4.2 visual harmony. Tessa finally looked up, a wry smile playing on her lips. Of course. She did. The catch-all. It's the legal equivalent of, because I said so. Did she mention the view corridor? She did. I pointed out it doesn't exist on any official map. And she said that the board's interpretation is the standard. Nolan sighed, sinking into a chair opposite her. It was humiliating. Tess. She made it clear that facts don't matter. From the top of the stairs, a small voice called out, "Daddy!" Avery, their 7-year-old daughter, stood there in her unicorn pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Did you ask them about the birdie bath? Nolan's frustration melted. He went to the bottom of the stairs and knelt. I did. Sweetie, we're still talking about it. The Blue Jays like it, she said, a serious pronouncement. They had a fight with a squirrel today. It was very loud. I bet it was. He laughed. Go on back to bed. We'll figure it out. He watched her disappear back into her room, and the purpose of this ridiculous fight clarified in his mind. He had installed the birdbath for her, after a trip to the local nature center. Avery had become obsessed with identifying birds. The simple concrete basin was her front row seat to the daily drama of cardinals and sparrows. Her uncomplicated joy was the entire point. It was a joy that existed on their private property, harming no one, and a woman with a clipboard was trying to extinguish it with a made-up rule. Nolan returned to the table. Tessa had turned a page in the binder and was running her finger down a paragraph. You know, she said thoughtfully, if we're going to fight this, we need to do it by the book. Her book. She tapped the page. I found something interesting. Nolan leaned over. She had highlighted 2 separate clauses on the same page. The first was the infamous Rule 8.4.2, the visual harmony clause, but below it, she had highlighted another one, paragraph 5.1.7, Powers and Duties. Listen to this. She read, "The association shall have no authority to restrict, regulate, or otherwise interfere with the rights of homeowners or public utility providers with respect to any land within the community designated on a recorded plat map as a public utility easement (PUE), beyond what is necessary to maintain the association's common property." Nolan shrugged. "Okay, so they can't tell the electric company where to put a transformer. How does that help us?" "I don't know if it does," Tessa admitted, capping her highlighter. "But it's a specific limitation on their power. And Barbara hates limitations. We just don't know if it applies to us." The next morning, Nolan saw the subtle signs of Barbara's reign. He saw Mr. Henderson, from across the street, hastily wheeling his trash bin back into his garage at 9:01 a.m., an hour after the permitted time. He saw Mrs. Gable next door, sadly trimming the tops of her prize-winning rose bushes because they had exceeded the 48-inch height limit. It was a beautiful neighborhood, clean and orderly. But it was a beauty maintained by an undercurrent of low-grade fear. People kept their heads down, their lawns immaculate, and their opinions to themselves. They didn't want to get on Barbara's list. Nolan was beginning to understand that he was already on it. The birdbath wasn't the problem. His refusal to bow was. The official declaration of war arrived 10 days later. It wasn't taped to the door or left in the mailbox. It came via certified mail, a green slip left by the postman that required a trip to the post office and a signature. The formality was designed to intimidate. It was dated October 19th. The envelope was from Premier Community Management, the third-party company that handled the HOA's administrative tasks. But Nolan knew the words inside came directly from Barbara. Tessa slid it open with a kitchen knife. "Here we go," she said, unfolding the single sheet of heavy bond paper. She read it aloud in a flat, clinical tone. "Formal notice of violation. Relot, 72, 114 Ashton Court, Willow Creek Subdivision. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Granger, this letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. An inspection of your property on October 18th confirmed the presence of an unapproved landscape feature birdbath that was previously addressed at the Board of Directors meeting on October 5th. This installation is in direct violation of CC&R, February 8.4.2, requirement to maintain visual harmony and avoid obstruction of scenic view corridors. As per the Association's enforcement policy, you are hereby required to cure this violation within 14 days from the date of this notice. Curing the violation requires the complete removal of the unapproved feature. Failure to cure the violation by November 2nd will result in the matter being scheduled for a formal hearing before the Board of Directors, where fines and other sanctions may be imposed. Sincerely, the Willow Creek HOA Board of Directors. CEO Premier Community Management. At the bottom of the page was a tracking number for the certified mail, 70018 2810 001 5529 4831. Nolan took the letter, the cold, procedural language, the specific dates. The citation of the very clause he had challenged it was a precise, bureaucratic escalation. The vague verbal warning at the meeting had now been codified into a formal threat. The clock was ticking. "She's starting the due process chain," Tessa said, her voice grim. "Courtesy notices the meeting. Now the formal violation. Next is the hearing. Then the fines. She's building a case for a lien if we don't pay." "Over a birdbath," Nolan said, the absurdity of it striking him yet again. "A lien on our house." It's not about the bird bath anymore. Nalin, Tessa said softly, placing a hand on his arm. It's about compliance. She's making an example of us. He looked out the window at the small stone fountain. Avery had left a few breadcrumbs on the edge, and a small brown sparrow was pecking at them. This small patch of their yard had become a battlefield. The letter in his hand wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. Remove your daughter's source of joy, or we will begin the slow, methodical process of threatening your home. The official process had begun, and Nalin knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he would not be the one to back down. Nalin believed in process. He believed that if you followed the correct channels, reasonable people could come to a reasonable solution. It was a belief that was about to be systematically dismantled. His first call was to Premier Community Management. He was routed to the Willow Creek account manager, a woman named Sharon, whose voice had the weary, monotonous tone of someone who spent 8 hours a day being yelled at. "Yes, Mr. Granger, I have a record of the violation notice," she said after he explained the situation. It was issued at the board's direction. "I understand that," Nalin said politely, "but the basis for the violation, Section 8.4.2, is legally vague. I'd like to discuss how we can resolve this before the hearing." "Our role is purely administrative, Mr. Granger," Sharon recited, the words clearly part of a script. "We execute the board's decisions. We don't interpret the governing documents. If you wish to dispute the violation, you must do so at the hearing." "Could you at least provide me with the minutes from the meeting where the board voted to issue this notice?" he asked. A pause. The tapping of a keyboard. "The minutes from the October 5th meeting have not yet been approved. They will be available to homeowners after the next board meeting in November." It was a bureaucratic fortress. The company implementing the rules claimed to have no power over them, and the body that had the power was shielding its actions behind procedural delays. So, there's nothing you can do. "You can comply with the notice, sir," Sharon said, a hint of robotic sympathy in her voice. That would be the most direct path to resolution. Frustrated, Nalin hung up. The next step was a direct appeal. He drafted a polite, carefully worded email to the official board of directors address. He reiterated his points from the meeting, attached the photo of the bird bath again, and formally requested an informal resolution before the deadline. The reply came less than an hour later. It was from Barbara's official presidential email account, but it was just a single, curt sentence. "Mr. Granger, the formal notice speaks for itself. The board considers this matter closed until the hearing date. Should you choose not to cure the violation. B. Whitmore." The finality of it was chilling. There would be no discussion, no negotiation, only compliance or punishment. That evening, Nalin decided to take a walk, hoping the cool autumn air would clear his head. He saw his neighbor, David Chen, pulling a few stray weeds from his lawn. David was a quiet software engineer who Nalin had always found friendly. "Hey, David," Nalin started, keeping his tone casual. "Got a minute?" David straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. He glanced around, a quick nervous habit Nalin had never noticed before. "Sure. Nalin. What's up?" "I just wanted to ask if you've ever had any dealings with the ACC. We're in a bit of a bind over a bird bath, of all things." David's friendly expression tightened. He took a half step back. "Oh, yeah, I try to stay out of all that. Just keep the lawn cut. You know." "Right. But this feels different." Nalin pressed gently. "Barbara is citing the visual harmony clause. It just seems wrong." David looked down the street. toward Barbara's perfectly manicured corner lot. "Look, Nolan, you're a good neighbor. My advice: just take the thing down. It's not worth the trouble. You don't want to get on her list. She holds a grudge." He gave a weak, apologetic shrug. "Sorry. I've got to get back to it." He turned away, leaving Nolan standing on the sidewalk. The message was the same one he'd been getting all day. From the management company, from the board, and now from his neighbors. He was isolated. The community, cowed by years of petty enforcement and the fear of retaliation, was not going to help him. They had all made a quiet calculation. The cost of their own peace was to look the other way. If he was going to fight, he would be fighting alone. Isolation was a catalyst. If Nolan and Tessa were on their own, they would have to become their own experts. The fight shifted from one of public persuasion to one of private investigation. If she's going to use the book against us, we need to know the book better than she does, Tessa declared, spreading a fresh stack of papers on the dining room table. On Tuesday, October 24th, Nolan sent another formal, certified letter to Premier Community Management. This time, he wasn't asking for a resolution. He was making a formal request for records under the state's Planned Community Act, which granted homeowners the right to inspect an association's official documents. He requested copies of the complete, unedited CC&Rs and bylaws, the approved board meeting minutes for the past 12 months, and the current fiscal year's detailed financial statements and budget. The management company had a legal obligation to comply within 10 business days. Nolan knew this would irritate Barbara. It was a move that said, "We are not going away. We are watching you." While they waited, Nolan made a point of being more visible in the neighborhood. He spent time gardening in the front yard, always near the bird bath. He gave friendly waves to Barbara when she drove past, which she never returned. It was a small act of defiance, a refusal to be intimidated into hiding. It was during one of these afternoons that he struck up a conversation with Daniel Petrov, his neighbor from 2 doors down. Daniel was a quiet widower in his late 60s, a retired Air Force veteran who spent most of his days tending to an immaculate vegetable garden in his backyard. He was one of the few original homeowners left in the subdivision. Nolan was trimming the hedges when Daniel walked over, holding a small basket of late-season tomatoes. "Heard you had a run-in with the Queen," Daniel said, his voice a low rumble. He handed the basket to Nolan. "Thought you might need these. Good for stress." "Thanks, Daniel," Nolan said, genuinely touched. "Yeah, you could say that. It's about the bird bath." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the small fountain. "It's never about the bird bath. Son, with her, it's always about control. And it's always about that specific stretch of land." He gestured vaguely toward the back of their properties. "She's always been particular about the views back there." "She calls it a scenic view corridor," Nolan said. Daniel snorted. "A view of what the highway sound barrier. She tried that view corridor nonsense with the Hendersons 5 years ago. Pushed them so hard about a garden shed that they finally gave up and moved." He paused, looking Nolan in the eye. "They say she's just protecting property values. But I've been here 20 years. She's protecting something. All right. I'm just not sure it's ours." The conversation was a small crack of light in the wall of silence Nolan had encountered. Daniel wasn't afraid. He was angry. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived from Premier Community Management. It was the document packet Nolan had requested. He and Tessa spread the contents across the table like a general mapping out a battlefield. "Okay, let's see what we've got," Tessa said, pulling out a sheaf of papers held together with a binder clip. "Meeting minutes, last 12 months. She began to flip through them. Standard stuff. Approval of previous minutes. Treasurer's report. Old business. Here we go. Landscaping committee report. She stopped, frowning. She held a page up to the light. In the budget approval section, next to line items for routine expenses like mowing and fertilizer, were several thick, black rectangles. Redactions. What the? Nolan leaned in. They redacted the meeting minutes. Can they even do that? Only for specific, legally protected reasons, Tessa said, her voice tight with anger. Like pending litigation or employee matters. They can't just black out financial information because they feel like it. She pointed to the faint text, visible through the back of the page. Look, you can almost make out the name. Vista, Scapes, Landscaping. And the line item says, Easement Maintenance. Easement maintenance, Nolan repeated slowly. Daniel said she was obsessed with that stretch of land. Before they could dig any deeper, the mail carrier arrived with the day's delivery. Among the bills and junk mail was another certified letter. Nolan's stomach clenched. He signed for it. A knot of dread tightening in his chest. It was the hearing notice. Notice of hearing, Relot 72, 114 Ashton Court. You are hereby notified that a hearing has been scheduled before the Board of Directors to address the uncured violation referenced in the notice dated October 19th. The hearing will take place on Wednesday, November 15th, at 7:00 p.m. at the Willow Creek Clubhouse. You have the right to attend and be heard. Should you fail to attend, the Board will proceed in your absence. The Board will consider the imposition of fines, starting at $100 plus a recurring daily fine of $25 until the violation is cured. The date was set. The confrontation was now official and unavoidable. The pressure had just been ratcheted up another notch. They had 2 weeks to build a defense against a system where the accuser was also the judge and jury. The dining room table now resembled a proper legal war room. Nolan and Tessa had pinned documents to a corkboard, cross-referencing CC&R clauses with the redacted minutes and the violation notices. The hearing notice sat in the center, a constant reminder of their deadline. They were making progress, but they were still missing the key, the one piece of incontrovertible evidence that could blow Barbara's case apart. Daniel Petrov's words echoed in Nolan's mind. She's always been particular about that stretch of land. That Saturday, Daniel came over, ostensibly to ask for help with a stubborn computer issue. But after Nolan fixed it, Daniel lingered in the kitchen, sipping the coffee Tessa had made him. He looked at the chaos of papers on their table. Building your case, he asked. Trying to, Nolan admitted. We found some weird payments for easement maintenance in the minutes, but they're redacted. Daniel's expression sharpened. Easement. You say he walked over to the table and picked up the violation notice. He read the phrase, scenic view corridor, and shook his head. That's her name for it. Not the county's. You know. Nolan, you're an architect. You work with site plans all the time. But the HOA site plan isn't the official one. The county has the final say on every property line, every setback, and every easement. It's all public record. Tessa looked up from her laptop. You think we should get the official plat map? I think you should have gotten it the day this started, Daniel said, a glint in his eye. He was a retired county surveyor, a fact he rarely mentioned. Barbara can write whatever she wants in her little newsletters, but she can't rewrite the legal survey filed with the county recorder. Go down there. Pull the recorded plat for Willow Creek. Section 3. I'll show you how to read it. On Monday morning, Nolan took a half-day off from work and drove to the county administration building. The recorder of deeds office was a quiet, fluorescent-lit world of rolling file cabinets and the soft hum of microfilm machines. He gave the clerk the subdivision name and his lot number. A few minutes later, she returned with a long, rolled-up document, secured with a rubber band. It felt like an ancient scroll. He unrolled it on a large, tilted viewing table. The plat map was a web of crisp, black lines and precise, elegant lettering. He found his street, Ashton Court, and then his lot. U72. He traced the property lines with his finger, the familiar shape of his yard rendered in the unforgiving language of legal surveying. And then he saw it. Running along the entire back 10 feet of his property, and all the properties on his side of the street, was a thin, dotted line. It was exactly where Barbara's imaginary view corridor was supposed to be, and printed in small capital letters alongside the line was the abbreviation he now knew to look for: PUE. Public Utility Easement. Nolan's breath caught. He pulled out his phone and brought up the photo he'd taken of Tessa's highlighted CC&Rs. Section bar 5.1.7. The association shall have no authority to restrict, regulate, or otherwise interfere with any land within the community designated on a recorded plat map as a public utility easement. Barbara didn't just have a weak case based on a subjective clause. She had no case at all. She was enforcing a rule in a location where the community's own governing documents explicitly stated she had zero jurisdiction. The aesthetic of that 10-foot strip of land was legally outside her control. The fight was no longer just defensive. He now had an offensive weapon. Nolan felt a surge of adrenaline. This changed everything. The birdbath wasn't just a violation of a non-existent rule. It was located on land the HOA had no power to regulate for aesthetic purposes. All her threats, all her condescension, it was all built on a foundation of lies. He paid for 3 certified copies of the map. As he walked out of the county building and into the bright sunlight, the heavy weight of the last few weeks began to lift. Barbara Whitmore had built her little kingdom on a throne of paper. Nayland Granger was about to burn it down with a single, official document. The discovery of the easement felt like a checkmate. Nolan and Tessa spent that evening refining their strategy for the hearing. Armed with the certified plat map, they were energized, confident. Their victory seemed not just possible, but inevitable. They had underestimated Barbara's ruthlessness. The retaliation came 2 days later. It wasn't aimed at Nolan, but at the man who had helped him. A bright white violation notice was stuck to Daniel Petrov's front door. Daniel brought it straight to Nolan, his face grim, his usual stoicism replaced by a quiet, simmering fury. "She was watching," Daniel said, his voice low. "She must have seen me talking to you." Nolan took the paper. The violation was for Daniel's flagpole. Unauthorized structure. Per ACC guidelines. Section 4.9, all flagpoles require prior written approval. "This flagpole has been here for 20 years, Daniel said, his jaw tight. "It was here when she moved in. I flew this flag when my son was deployed. I flew it when my wife passed." It was a cruel, calculated strike. Barbara knew Nolan was digging, and she was punishing the person she suspected of helping him. It was a warning shot, a clear message: keep pushing, and I will hurt your friends. The violation presented Nolan with a terrible moral choice. He could back down now, remove the birdbath, and hope Barbara would drop the matter with Daniel. It would be a personal defeat, but it would protect his neighbor. Or he could escalate, using the evidence he had to fight for both of them, knowing it could make things even worse for Daniel in the short term. That night, Nolan's confidence was gone, replaced by a gnawing guilt. "This is my fault. Tess," he said, pacing their living room. "I got him involved." "No," Tessa said firmly, stopping him. This is Barbara's fault. She's a bully. And what do bullies do? They isolate their target. Then they punish anyone who tries to help. This isn't a reason to back down. Nolan. It's the reason we have to win. The decision was made, but the weight of it remained. The following evening, Nolan received a text from an unknown number. Can you meet Community Park? 20 mins. Come alone. Nolan's first instinct was that it was a trap. But Tessa recognized the number. It's Carl Jenkins, she said, pulling up a contact list for the board. The one who wouldn't look at you. Nolan went. The park was deserted, the evening air crisp. Carl was sitting on a bench near the playground, hunched inside his jacket, looking miserable. Thanks for coming, Carl mumbled, not looking up. I shouldn't be here. What's this about? Carl Nolan asked. It's the flagpole. Daniels, Carl said, his voice barely a whisper. Barbara pushed it through. The other two board members just went along. I voted against it. She didn't like that. He finally looked at Nolan, his eyes pleading. She's out of control. This isn't what I signed up for. I just wanted to help with the pool committee. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain envelope. I can't be part of it anymore. This is a copy of the unredacted minutes you asked for. And the financials. She's been paying a company called Vistascapes Landscaping thousands of dollars for easement clearing projects. That's the company that gets the contracts when she forces people to remove trees or sheds from that view corridor. Nolan took the envelope. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The motive. It wasn't just about power. It was about money. You need to stop her. Granger, Carl said, his voice cracking. But you have to protect me. If she knows I gave you this, she'll ruin me. She'll find something. She always does. As Carl was about to leave, he hesitated. Look, she's not pure evil. The words sounded strange, forced. Last year, the Miller family on Elm Street. Their son got sick, really sick. They fell behind on their dues. Barbara quietly had the board waive their fines and forgive 3 months of payments. She used an anonymous hardship fund. But it was her idea. She told us. Some rules are meant to be bent. She saved them from a lien. Carl looked at Nolan, a deep sadness in his eyes. I just thought you should know. It's not all black and white. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the twilight. Nolan stood there, the envelope feeling heavy in his hand. He now had the proof of financial misconduct he needed for a decisive victory. But Carl's final story had added a new, complex layer. If he went public with everything he knew about Barbara's secret dealings, would he inadvertently expose the Millers' private financial and medical struggles? He wanted justice, not collateral damage. The path forward was clear, but it was no longer simple. The annual homeowners meeting was Barbara Whitmore's coronation. It was held in the largest room of the clubhouse, and unlike the sparsely attended monthly meetings, this one was packed. More than 100 homeowners filled the rows of chairs, drawn by the promise of free cookies and the annual budget review. The air was thick with tension. The story of the birdbath, and more recently the flagpole, had spread through the neighborhood in quiet whispers. People knew a confrontation was coming. Nolan and Tessa arrived early and took seats near the front. Nolan had signed up for a 5-minute speaking slot during the open forum, the last one on the list. On a large projector screen at the front of the room, beside the Willow Creek HOA logo, a digital clock was displayed. It would be used to time each speaker. 5 minutes. 300 seconds to dismantle an empire. Barbara, wearing a severe navy blue blazer, ran the meeting with brisk, unsmiling efficiency. She moved through the agenda, the approval of last year's minutes, the treasurer's report, the committee updates with a speed that discouraged questions. When she presented the budget, the line item for landscape maintenance was a single, opaque number. No one raised a hand. Finally, she announced, "We will now move to the open forum. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. We begin with Mrs. Gable to discuss the holiday lighting contest." One by one, residents came to the lectern. A man complained about speeding cars. A woman asked for more pet waste stations. Then Barbara called the final name, Mr. Nayland Granger. A hush fell over the room. Nayland stood and walked to the front, his heart a steady, heavy drum against his ribs. He carried nothing but a small USB drive. He connected his laptop to the projector cable, and the screen flickered, now showing his desktop. He took a deep breath. "Thank you, Barbara, members of the board," he began, his voice amplified by the microphone. The clock on the screen started its countdown, 05:00. "My name is Nayland Granger, and I live at 114 Ashton Court. I'm here tonight to talk about my birdbath." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Barbara watched him, her expression unreadable. "For the past 6 weeks," Nayland continued, "my family has been subjected to a series of escalating threats from this board, all stemming from one rule, CC&R Section 8.4.2. He clicked a button, and the text of the rule appeared on the screen. The phrases visual harmony and scenic view corridors highlighted in yellow. The clock read 04:25. "The board has claimed this rule gives them the authority to demand the removal of a small fountain from my private property. They claim it obstructs a view corridor. The problem is, this view corridor does not exist." Another click. A high-resolution scan of the certified county plat map filled the screen. Nayland used his mouse to zoom in on his property. He traced the dotted line running along the back. The letters PUE were sharp and clear. U330. "This is the official, legally recorded map of our community. That dotted line is a public utility easement. As many of you know, an easement grants specific rights to outside parties, in this case, utility companies. Now, let's look at what our own CC&Rs say about the HOA's power in these areas." He brought up Section 405.1.7. "The association shall have no authority to restrict, regulate, or otherwise interfere." The words were huge, undeniable. A murmur went through the crowd. Barbara, for the first time, looked unsettled. Her grip tightened on her pen. 02:45. "The board is enforcing a subjective aesthetic rule in a place where its own governing documents explicitly state it has no jurisdiction," Nayland said, his voice hardening. "This is not an oversight. It is a deliberate abuse of power. And I wanted to know why." His next click brought up 2 documents side by side. On the left was the redacted page from the HOA minutes. On the right was the unredacted version Carl had given him. He highlighted the blacked-out line items on one, and the corresponding clear text on the other, 0150. "These are the minutes from the last year. The board has been paying tens of thousands of dollars to a company called Vistascapes Landscaping for easement maintenance and easement clearing. They are manufacturing violations on land they don't control to generate contracts for a preferred vendor." The room was now utterly silent. Everyone was leaning forward. The clock showed 01:05. "Who is Vistascapes Landscaping?" Nayland asked, his voice ringing through the room. "It's a good question." His final click brought up the state's corporate registration for Vistascapes Landscaping, LLC. He zoomed in on the list of corporate officers. There were 2 names. The second was a woman named Barbara Jensen. "Jensen," Nayland said, letting the name hang in the air for a second. as in Barbara Whitmore's maiden name. The clock ticked past 00:30. He had made his case, and he had not mentioned the Miller family. His victory would be built on provable fraud, not personal hardship. This was never about a birdbath, he concluded, his eyes locked on Barbara. It was never about property values. It was about using the power of this association to systematically defraud the very homeowners you swore to serve, funneling our dues into a company you secretly control. The digital clock on the screen hit 00:00. Nolan stepped back from the lectern. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, the room erupted. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. Shouts erupted from every corner of the room. Barbara, her face a pale, frozen mask, banged her gavel on the table, but the sound was lost in the uproar. "Order, this meeting is not—" Her voice was drowned out. A woman in the front row, a corporate lawyer Nayland recognized from the neighborhood watch, stood up. "Point of order." "Madam President," she yelled, her voice cutting through the noise. "I make a motion from the floor to immediately freeze all discretionary spending by this board and to commission a full, independent forensic audit of the association's financials for the past 5 years." "Second," shouted at least 20 people at once. "The motion is out of order," Barbara snapped, her composure cracking. "The motion is perfectly in order according to Robert's rules and our own bylaws," the lawyer retorted. "We demand a vote." Before Barbara could respond, another homeowner, a burly man who ran a construction company, stood up. "I move for a vote of no confidence in the entire board of directors and to immediately initiate recall proceedings as outlined in Article 3 of the bylaws." Second, the roar was deafening. The representative from Premier Community Management, a young man in an ill-fitting suit who had been quietly observing from the side, was now frantically texting on his phone, his face ashen. He could see his company's lucrative contract with Willow Creek evaporating before his eyes. This was the nightmare scenario for a management company, a full-blown community revolt fueled by documented evidence of fraud. Their liability was now in question. Carl Jenkins, sitting at the board table, looked physically ill. The other 2 board members were staring at Barbara, their expressions a mixture of horror and betrayal. They were beginning to realize how deeply they had been implicated. Barbara tried to regain control, shouting that the meeting was adjourned, but no one was listening. The lawyer and the construction manager were already directing homeowners to a sign-in sheet to formally record the motions. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic fracture. Barbara Whitmore was no longer in charge. The homeowners were. Nolan and Tessa watched from the side as the community self-organized. People who had been afraid to speak up for years were now demanding answers, their voices unified and strong. Daniel Petrov walked over to Nolan and clapped him firmly on the shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his eyes, clear and proud, said everything. The property manager finally pushed his way through the crowd to the lectern. "Please, everyone," he stammered. "Premier Community Management takes these allegations very seriously. We will cooperate fully. We will place the association's funds in a restricted account, pending this review." It was over. The bureaucratic fortress had been breached, not by a battering ram, but by a key forged from public records, bylaws, and the courage to stand up and speak for 300 seconds. Nolan hadn't just won an argument over a birdbath. He had given his neighbors their community back. The weeks that followed the annual meeting were a blur of lawyers, accountants, and special elections. The forensic audit, commissioned by a unanimous vote of the homeowners at a subsequent emergency meeting, moved with startling speed. It confirmed everything Nolan had presented and uncovered far more. The kickback scheme with Vistascapes was just the beginning. The audit revealed a complex web of falsified invoices, phantom contractors, and systematically inflated costs for everything from pool chemicals to sidewalk repair. Barbara, along with the cousin who officially ran Vistascapes, were implicated in a criminal investigation launched by the District Attorney's Office for fraud and embezzlement. The entire board was recalled. In their place, a 5-member interim oversight committee was elected, tasked with stabilizing the HOA and restoring trust. To his own surprise, Nolan was nominated and elected to serve on it. His first act was to propose a new bylaw, drafted with Tessa's expert guidance, that required a direct homeowner vote for any non-emergency expenditure over $500. It passed with overwhelming support. Transparency was the new law of the land. The final surprise, the one that left even the most cynical residents speechless, came from the deepest corners of the audit trail. The embezzled funds weren't just padding a bank account. They were being methodically funneled through a shell LLC to make monthly mortgage payments on a secret second property, a sprawling lake house in another state. Barbara hadn't just been skimming. She had been using the community's money to build herself a second life, a lakeside monument to her own greed. The scale of the deceit was breathtaking. It was an abuse of power so profound, it went far beyond petty tyranny. The story culminated not at a celebratory barbecue, but in the same clubhouse where the battle had been won. It was the first meeting of the new, permanently elected board of directors. The room was full again, but the atmosphere was different. It was calm, hopeful, and businesslike. Nolan, having fulfilled his duty on the interim committee, sat in the audience with Tessa and Avery. The new board president, the lawyer who had made the first motion from the floor, called the meeting to order. "The first item on our new business agenda," she announced, her voice clear and steady, "is a motion to formally dismiss, with prejudice, violation 2023-47 issued against the property of Mr. Daniel Petrov." She looked directly at Daniel, who sat in the front row. "The board finds that this violation was issued without merit and as an act of retaliation, and we offer our sincerest apologies to Mr. Petrov." She called for a vote. 5 hands went up. The motion passes unanimously. The violation is expunged from the record. A round of applause, warm and genuine, filled the room. Nolan caught Daniel's eye. The old soldier gave a slow, deliberate nod of thanks. In the center of Nolan's front yard, the small concrete birdbath stood as a quiet testament, a place where the birds could come and go freely, no longer under the watchful, avaricious eye of a queen. The community was finally healing, building something new on the ruins of the old.